So, welcome to you both. They didn't actually leave the best till last, did they? What sense have you two made from those four scenarios that we've just seen, and what is the goal? Keith, we'll start with you.
I think what the scenarios have enabled us to do is test a bunch of possible futures. They're internally consistent, but they're quite rangingly different. But what we are finding from those scenarios is there are a lot of things that are consistent in terms of the workforce, outcomes from those scenarios. So the scenarios are giving us a confidence that if policy decisions are made, that having tested the robustness of them with these scenarios, you can make some pretty confident decisions in certain areas. One of them is really about the demand for higher skills. Consistently across all the scenarios, we're seeing industry demanding higher skills. Higher skill occupations grow at a rate of 1.6 times lower skilled occupations, lower skilled jobs. And the occupations that come out most strongly are the sort of professional occupations, and then the community and sort of social service sort of areas across all scenarios.
But some of those scenarios would lead to higher unemployment, wouldn't they?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in the scenario at the back, the one we left the best till last, yeah. the Ring of Fire scenario, of course, unemployment gets quite high in that world. Yeah.
So some winners, but not everyone.
Yep, there are winners, but not everyone. Yeah. I mean, again, we test a range of, I think unemployment across our scenarios varies from about 5% to about 6.5%.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Michael?
Really just to add to what Keith said, but casting back a minute, you just finished the previous session talking about the number of unknowns.
Yes.
Now, what the scenario does is identify the unknowns and really puts a plausible range on those unknowns. And what we find is that, as Keith just said, we're getting an enormous amount of commonality, which greatly increases your confidence in going forward. Remembering too that when you invest in skills, your returns are over a very long period. I mean, it's one thing to make an investment for a year or two, but really the return on skills is over a person's lifetime.
Yeah. But it can be a long pipeline too, can't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Let me just elaborate a little bit on the commonalities. Keith pointed to the fact that, in each scenario, the higher skills are increasing at about 1.5 times the lower skills. But if you go a bit further than that, you find that in 3 of the 4 scenarios, the demand for qualifications at Cert 3 level or above, that's tradesmen and through to higher education, diplomas and so on. And 3 of the 4, that demand's increasing at an average annual rate of 4 to 4.5%. Now that's not a huge difference, looking over 15 years. And even the worst case scenario, the Ring of Fire, it's increasing by over 3% per annum. So what we know from that is it's very unlikely on present policies that the supply is likely to increase at that rate. And so whatever scenario we've got that's plausible, we do face a gap for skills in the future.
So then, of course, the next question, and this is what comes to your national strategy. Yeah. So the question mark then is, what do you do about it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Michael's point about the supply side, it is actually pretty locked in. The demographics of our population are such that the young cohort isn't growing at a rapid rate. In fact, it's fairly stable. Yeah. And that's the supply, if you like, of new skills into the workforce. So that's a big issue for us. So we've got to make more use of what we've got. We've got to be more innovative. We've got to be able, some work we did a couple of years ago indicated that if we looked at people, for example, with an advanced diploma, I think it's something more than 50% of people with an advanced diploma are working in occupations that aren't using, if you like, the skills, the qualifications that they've got. So there's this whole sort of thrust about, let's look at the sort of job designs, let's look at the way work is carried out, let's look at the skills that people have got and do a much better job of actually utilising the skills that people have.
Michael, I mean, any kind of planning that's going to be involved has got to affect education clearly, but the tertiary sector and also business leadership, I would have thought. So how switched on is the tertiary sector to what's going on and what it has to do? I know there's a lot of debate, there's a lot of talk, but in reality, how switched on?
I'm not sure I'm sufficiently expert to give you a definitive answer on that, but let me just say I do think it's a lot more switched on than it was. Senator Evans talked about a supply-driven model, and that supply-driven model was very much driven by what teachers wanted to teach, if I can put it that way.
Yes.
And even what they could teach.
Yeah.
And I think the reforms that have occurred have switched the system much more to focusing on what is needed. Now, whether we've got far enough along that track, I think is more of a moot point. But I do think we are much better placed now than we were even 10 years ago, or even perhaps 5 years ago.
Yeah. Keith?
Yeah, I agree with what Michael said. I think probably the point to add to that, though, is it's not just about the sort of the tertiary sector. I think it's about industry.
Well, exactly. That was my next question.
Okay. Well, let's go there.
Because I wonder just, does business think broadly enough and creatively enough when it's looking for productivity gains against the backdrop that we're all operating with?
Well, I think that the international benchmarks would say to us that we could do a lot better in terms of productivity. We know that the productivity, multi-factor productivity has been pretty flat for the last decade. We know that labour productivity has been slowing. We know that the Australian income really for the last decade has been propped up by terms of trade, high terms of trade. If you go back for the previous 4 decades, terms of trade almost made no contribution to the national income. But in the last decade, I think it's 1.2% per annum contribution to sort of increasing income. So we've kind of been getting a bit of a free ride on the back of terms of trade, and that falls off, and you're back to productivity as the thing that actually drives the increase in income. And we've probably been a bit complacent. We've really got to get on top of productivity in a much sort of stronger way. We've got to innovate. It does come back to things like making the use of the skills that we've got. To do all that, you need good management, you need good leadership. And I think it's for companies to sort of really look at themselves and sort of ask the question, are we getting the most out of the workforce that we have? Can we do better? I think every time we think about...
It's not just about waiting for the next piece of technology that's going to allow you to reduce your numbers. It's not just about keeping a lid on wages, is it?
No, it's definitely not just about technology. That's one of the things that is people jump to when we talk about innovation and productivity, often jump to technology. But actually some of the best innovations are actually about the way a business runs. It's about the process. It's about the way you organise your business, not about necessarily technology purely.
Yeah. Michael?
I haven't got a lot to add, but I do think the technology exists. The question is how quickly you adapt to it and take it up. And that really goes to the organisation of the business, how work's organised, how jobs are designed and so on. And there's a really big agenda in this space, which has to be done at individual workplaces, I believe. It can be done cooperatively between management and employees and their employees' representatives, but it has to be very much enterprise-based.
Just, you can extrapolate possibilities in relation to the Chinese economy, the European economy, the Americans and so on, those kinds of the big dynamics of a global economy. But isn't it increasingly difficult, if not impossible, to really plan with any accuracy for where technology is going to take us?
Yes, I suppose, but we don't need to plan at a sort of a detail level. You need to look at, it's about the adaptability of an organisation. I worked for a company, Woodside. It's an oil and gas company. It's actually a technology company. We took the view that competitive advantage came from not the technology, but your ability to apply that technology better than your competitors. That's the sort of... So I think it is about your workforce, and it's about the environment you create in the workforce. It's about the ability of the organisation to innovate, to adapt, to be flexible, to change. So the technologies will come, but it's actually how well you can pick those up and use them is the thing that's going to define it.
Isn't it also about the pace of the change in the technology and the implications of that? I mean, for instance, I saw a blurb for an innovations conference that's coming up in Melbourne, I think, in November. And one of its features is a futurist who is described as Google's chief futurist. A lot of futurists around, some are better than others. This particular futurist is going to talk about 2 billion disappearing jobs by 2030, about the teacherless classroom, the driverless car, the printable house, a house essentially that can be built by a computer and a 3D printer. And just to add to that, a couple of days ago I read an article about about an Australian who has reinvented the light bulb, was how it was written. Essentially, he's come up with a light bulb that can be controlled by smartphone. So you can be anywhere in the house, you stick your light bulb in and it's got a wireless connection. So, and he invented that so friends of his didn't have to cut into their brick walls to have an expensive renovation when they put the wiring in. I immediately think, well, if you're not going to have wiring in your walls, that's no electricians for houses. Maybe no electricians for big... That's one tiny illustration of how dramatically something can change for an entire industry. Michael?
Yeah, look, as you said, there are differing opinions, but let me say in our work, the scenarios, we have quite different rates of take-up, if you like, adaptation to technology built into those scenarios, and that is one of the features of it. I would put the emphasis on adaptation because if you're looking 15 years ahead, and that's what the scenarios basically are, or a bit less than that now, the major things that are likely to happen are already known. It's a question of how quickly they're introduced. And we do allow for quite significant differences in the rate of change and in the adaptation. But I think we're reasonably confident about the directions, the nature of the changes. Just on the question of the nature of the changes, I suppose I'd just have a little bit of scepticism. There's absolutely no doubt that information technology in the past has hugely reduced demand for some types of jobs. Senator Evans referred to the fact there are no typists anymore. One can proliferate that sort of instance. But it hasn't reduced the demand for female labour or for male labour because the technology, while it's very productivity enhancing, also increases demand. And so while telecommunications costs have come down, look at the expansion of the number of calls people make and iPhones, etc. And the history has been of the paperless office that, one, we haven't achieved it, and two, the demand for analysts, which are higher skilled jobs, has massively increased.
Now, I'm going to keep going with the conversation, but I'd also like to invite you in. If there are questions from the floor, please indicate and we'll get a microphone to you as quickly as we can. But I'll also keep the questions coming here in the meantime. Can anyone indicate? Do you have a question? Now, we have one just in the middle, close to the aisle here in the middle. We've got a microphone coming to you. Just briefly identify yourself and straight to the question.
Hi, I'm Nicole Barton from the Department of Defence. We've heard a lot of talk this morning about the requirement for higher level skills into the future and for people to reskill and upskill. It seems to me there's an underlying assumption that there's a capacity within the population to develop those skills. Has anyone tested that assumption?
No, I think the point you raise is a really important one. I mean, the scenario work is telling us quite clearly that the gap between the lower skilled worker and the higher skilled worker is widening, and the importance, if you like, of the foundation skills, literacy and numeracy, which Minister Evans spoke about earlier, is going to be absolutely critical going forward, because if we don't sort of lift the overall kind of literacy and numeracy levels, we are going to be, kind of creating almost this two kind of classes of worker. The literacy and numeracy are fundamental. They're the things that sort of enable the higher skills. If we can address those and raise the level of literacy and numeracy significantly, then we'll meet the future high skills demands. I think it's a bit dated now, but the AL survey told us we've got a real issue that 50% of the existing working population has a literacy level below level 3, which is kind of about the equivalent of a sort of Cert 3 level of literacy requirement. So there's a major issue in terms of existing workers, and if we look at people that aren't in work, I think the number is something like 70% of people who aren't in work have low literacy and numeracy levels, below level 3. So, we're not going to achieve the skill levels we need to achieve unless we can fundamentally raise literacy and numeracy, foundation skills.
Mike, do you have anything to add?
No.
Okay, we've got another question. You might have to stand in your seat so I can see you. Yes.
Hi, my name's Nina, so I'm at the Department...
Sorry, you've got to speak into the microphone.
Sorry. My name's Nina. I'm at the Department of Broadband looking at the future of working from home. And one of the important points you made about the potential of productivity hits home for me, in that it's not about the technology being available, it's how businesses, particularly at an enterprise level, take up that technology. So in the case of high-speed broadband and the role of the NBN, there's the potential for small to medium enterprises to look at how they structure work, but that's a significant shift in the way they do that. So what are you looking at, or what would your suggestions be for how that productivity shift should occur?
Mike, do you want to start?
Yeah, look, I suppose, thinking about it myself, I wonder whether broadband and working from home, which broadband makes possible, will impact so much on productivity, rather more on participation. That a lot of people, I suppose particularly women, who are trying to balance a number of other responsibilities, may feel that they're able to work more hours if they could work from home, or work more from home than they currently can. So I would expect the biggest impact to be on participation rather than productivity. On the face of it, I don't see why sitting at a computer terminal at home you'll be any more or less productive than sitting at a computer terminal in an office.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've touched on a really good point, though, about small to medium enterprises. I think when we look at workforce development, we look at the abilities of organisations to adapt, to innovate, etc., you often find that capability in the larger organisations because they have the kind of resources. I think the evidence would say that smaller companies are probably going to need more help in that space, and what those sort of interventions may need to be, we haven't really kind of tossed around in the board yet, I guess, but there's no doubt that we'll have to help put some sort of plans in place to help the smaller companies to sort of adapt to this more productive, more flexible, more environment.
Just finish with this question if we can, and that is how can Australia compete into the future with Asia's transition from developing to developed status, talking specifically about education and skilling. The massive numbers of educated, increasingly skilled workers coming down from the pipeline in countries like China and India. I mean, massive numbers over the next 20 years or so. We're already exporting professional jobs as well as semi-skilled jobs to Asia from Australia now. What's that going to be like by 2025?
I think you've also got to factor in that as Asia upskills, their living standards will go up commensurately.
And the wage bill. And,
well, their wages will go up too. But also, when their income and living standards go up, their demand will go up. So instead of selling them just raw materials so they can urbanise, as we put earlier, I think we'll be selling other skills and services and highly skilled services. We've got almost 300 years of experience since the Industrial Revolution first started in about 1750. And countries that have been at the, if you like, the forefront, starting with Britain, they didn't suffer when other countries, caught up with them. They still continued to increase their living standards, etc. And I don't see why it'd be any different for us.
Anything to add?
I think it actually poses a great opportunity for Australia. I mean, this is the so-called conversion century, and it's really about us looking to put the skills into our workforce that enable us to compete in the Asian century. For us to be able to effectively, if you operate as businesses in Asia. And that's something that a lot of companies don't have a lot of experience with. So, with the languages, with the culture, but actually how business is done. So it's actually how can we build those skills in our, in our workforce. So
what's the timetable for the national strategy?
Well, I think just looking at Phil, now we're hoping to sort of be publishing our report early next year, but we'll probably get towards our sort of finalisation internally towards the end of this year.
Keith, Spence, Michael Keating, thanks very much.